The situation in the Middle East just escalated again, and it's absolutely dominating the headlines right now. Welcome to today's Explainer. I'm your host, and we're going to unpack this incredibly chaotic situation involving Iran, the UAE, and the US. Now, just to be super clear up front, we're not taking any sides here. We're just going to dive straight into the hard facts, figure out exactly what's happening on the ground, and look at why this actually matters to the rest of the world.
To make sense of all this, we've broken things down into 4 quick parts. First, the red alerts in the UAE. Second, the clashes happening in the Strait. Third, the IRGC's threats and retaliations. And finally, the overall impact on global energy.
All right, let's jump right into part 1, red alerts in the UAE. So, things escalated incredibly fast. The UAE literally had to activate its nationwide air defense systems to intercept a massive wave of incoming threats. And we're not just talking about one type of weapon here. They confirmed intercepts of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones. It was a completely multifaceted barrage, which is exactly why those nationwide red alerts started blaring in the first place.
And you can imagine the immediate impact this had on everyday life. People reported hearing loud, echoing explosions across various parts of the country. It got so intense that local authorities actually had to issue urgent directives, basically telling residents, hey, you need to stay indoors and follow emergency safety protocols right now.
But it wasn't just civilian areas that were put on edge. Critical infrastructure was in the crosshairs too. Authorities in Abu Dhabi reported that right after their defense systems picked up an incoming threat, a fire actually broke out near the old Abu Dhabi airport. Now luckily, first responders were able to bring the blaze under control pretty quickly and prevent a much bigger disaster.
Okay, moving on to part 2, clashes in the Strait.
If we shift our focus over to the incredibly volatile Strait of Hormuz, we're seeing 2 completely opposing stories about what's actually sparking these maritime clashes. On one hand, Iranian media is pointing the finger squarely at the UAE, accusing them of actively assisting U.S. military operations. But on the flip side, U.S. CENTCOM is saying, no, American warships were just repelling Iranian attacks before launching their own counterstrikes. It is a textbook he said, she said situation. And honestly, those competing narratives are severely complicating an already tense standoff.
But cutting through all that noise, there is one undeniable hard fact we need to look at, and that is the number 2. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the IRGC Navy, actually fired upon and seized exactly 2 commercial ships right there in the Strait of Hormuz. That's a confirmed event, and it is raising some massive red flags about the security of commercial transit in that region.
So why did the IRGC actually seize these vessels? Well, their official justification is that the ships simply ignored warnings. But here's the thing you have to remember. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just any waterway. It's literally one of the world's most vital energy corridors. When commercial ships are getting seized or fired upon here, it doesn't just rattle regional security, it sends shockwaves through the entire global trade system.
Which brings us right into part 3, IRGC threats and retaliations.
Every conflict has a spark, right? Well, the stated motivation behind the IRGC's expanding geopolitical threats all comes down to retaliation. They're claiming that their current military actions are a direct, one-to-one response to a prior attack that was carried out on an Iranian bank.
And you can really see the severity of this retaliation in their direct statements. The IRGC explicitly threatened to, and I'm quoting here, attack U.S. and Israeli-backed economic centers and banks in the region. Now, this is a huge deal because it brilliantly illustrates how this military conflict is pivoting. They're now explicitly targeting critical economic infrastructure, which totally broadens the scope of the danger.
Now, up until this point, we've mostly been focusing on the regional conflict over in the Middle East. But you're probably sitting there wondering, okay, but how is this actually impacting the rest of the world? Well, let's zoom out for a second and look at the tangible, everyday consequences this has for the global economy.
And that leads us to our final section, impact on global energy.
As you might guess, these growing disruptions immediately caused intense reactions across global energy markets. Now, based on the absolute latest data, international oil prices have actually decreased slightly from their previous peaks. They did this in an effort to stabilize supply after those initial disruptions in West Asia. But, and this is a big but, even with that slight drop, prices still remain significantly high. And what that means is every single country on Earth, and everyday people like us, are feeling the economic weight of this conflict right at the gas pump and across our supply chains.
So that brings us to one final absolutely critical question.
Will this regional instability, these military strikes, and all these competing narratives permanently reshape our global energy corridors? I mean, the events we're seeing right now might not just be a temporary flare-up. They could actually be signaling a massive structural shift in the entire global economy. The situation is extremely volatile, and it's definitely one we're going to need to watch closely. Thanks so much for joining me on this Explainer today, and as always, stay curious.